Yeah, I was.
哥们都上了，我们
打开，打开给大家。
不是靠出去的，从那上面丢上去的嘛，叫他这几个丢上去的。当时进去的时候就是到这儿的水，
你水是吧？全是。
啊，我的水也到这儿。啊。那老头们都是站到这靠，拿那个手机手抖的，上面衣服也不穿，成了那都70来岁了。
怕他你一下弄得塌了，主要是怕他一下水冒的一下塌了。你塌了这白天的要是黑夜吧，可歘铁怪了。
Typhoon Dianmu made landfall in southern China's Guangdong province. More than 40,000 people had to flee their homes on Hainan Island because of widespread flooding. Train service and most public transport have been suspended. Guangxi and Guangdong provinces are on alert for more heavy rains in the next couple of days.
Dianmu hit Guangdong province on Thursday before moving to Hainan province, where a relentless rainstorm raged for 5 days, causing 1 death and leaving at least 2 people missing. More than 780,000 people were relocated and over 800 houses destroyed. The direct economic losses are estimated to be over 1.1 billion yuan. Local authorities are in the midst of helping residents to recover from the damage that's been caused.
At this market in central Baghdad, a dousing like this doesn't help for long, evaporating quickly in temperatures that are regularly exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. It's the height of summer here, but no one remembers it being this hot for this long.
You can see that people are on the verge of melting. It is over 50 degrees now. Yesterday it was said to be around 54.
There is no electricity, no water. We need the government to provide us with it. Even the private generators aren't keeping up.
Iraq's facilities have not been able to deliver consistent supplies of electricity and water, so people rely on generators and water supplies however they can get it. But it's not just the temperature. Record high humidity is adding to the problem. It's worse still for the more than 3 million people, that's around 10% of Iraq's population, who have been forced from their homes, either fleeing ISIL or the fighting to dislodge the armed group in some areas. They've sought refuge in places under the control of Iraq's government or in the Kurdish region, like the Dabaga camp. Living in a tent in scorching, often life-threatening temperatures, this family says it is still better than what they endured.
We were depending on God. We ate whatever we had. I told the children that if there was no food, we shouldn't ask for it from others.
The hot weather is expected to continue into next month. Even for people who have endured their share of hardship, these high and humid temperatures are hard to bear. Miriam Nahond, Al Jazeera.
In a country that has more than its fair share of natural beauty, the cloud forests of Monteverde stand alone in their unique nature. Atmospheric conditions have to be perfect to maintain so much biodiversity, and this famed national park attracts more than 200,000 visitors a year. Park ranger Ronnie Brenes tells us people come for the beauty and because the park here is so well looked after.
I know you hate the sun, little buddy.
But biologist Richard Laval has real concerns about the future. He's been collecting scientific data in Monteverde for almost half a century and says rising temperatures are a direct threat to the cloud forests.
As a species, we're self-destructing, and even if we wanted to self-destruct intentionally, we couldn't do a much better job than we're already doing.
And Richard Laval isn't alone in his conclusions. Other scientists say lowland species of plants and animals are steadily moving into what's left of the forest, whilst others are retreating in search of cooler temperatures. Essentially then, this incredibly unique place is a supersensitive barometer to climate change, and researchers say they've already lost 2 species of frog that only exist here, and others in the area say they're seeing changes too. Aldemar Salazar has been farming organic coffee on the edge of the cloud forest for 20 years, but his business is now under serious threat. In the last couple of seasons, 80% of his crop has been killed by a fungus that never grew here before.
Climate change and sudden differences in temperatures during the day make the perfect environment for the rust fungus to develop. That's what is causing so much damage to our coffee plants.
Globally, cloud forests are rare and delicate. They make up just 1% of the world's wooded areas. But if the scientists are right about what's happening here, they may be in real danger of disappearing altogether. Andy Gallagher, Al Jazeera, Monteverde, Costa Rica.
Now to Louisiana. The flooding death toll rose today to 11. More than 30,000 people have been rescued. More than 11,000 are in shelters tonight. Have a look at this. This is a school in Hammond, Louisiana before the floods. This is the school now, surrounded. Omar Villafranca has the latest.
The historic flooding continues to spread throughout the state. Nearly 90% of the homes in Denham Springs suffered flood damage. As the water flows downstream, towns like Sorrento are being submerged. Volunteers and rescue teams are still looking for stranded residents.
This is our low spot on this street.
Tanya Whitney's Sorrento Street was completely flooded.
Very long road ahead. We just, try to do the best we can do. I said a lot of the local people, we band together. We try to help each other out because, we're all in the same boat.
Even though the storm wasn't a hurricane, Louisiana Governor John Bell Edwards says it's been a challenge.
We asked people to evacuate as soon as we knew that we were going to see record levels of water.
Was it too late by then?
Well, you can't give the warning before you have it. And so, obviously there are lessons that we're learning. I'm not going to say that it's been mistake-free, but we issued a declaration of emergency here in the state that included the entire state, I think in a very timely fashion.
On Sunday, volunteers rescued Adam Albright and his family from the rising floodwaters in Baton Rouge. Today, the father of two is cleaning out his flood-damaged home.
I knew it was affecting a lot of people, out there. I didn't think it was going to hit us,
In the last few hours, the water here has risen several inches in Sorrento. Scott, if the water keeps rising, residents may start evacuating.
Omar Villafranca covering the story in Louisiana. Omar, thank you.
Well, flooding in Louisiana has sparked the biggest disaster response in the U.S. since Hurricane Sandy. The Advocate in Baton Rouge says rising waters have broken every record. Flooding since Friday is responsible for at least 7 deaths. More than 11,000 people are homeless, and much of the southern portion of the state is under a flood warning. Omar Villafranca is in Baton Rouge as homeowners begin to assess the damage. Omar, good morning.
Good morning. The water is starting to recede here in Baton Rouge, but to give you an idea of how high it was, we were on a rescue boat on Sunday and we passed by that house. All we could see was the roof. Thousands of homes in this area are damaged, and with water still on the move, it's only going to get worse before it gets better.
We're not going to give up. We're going to stay to the bloody end, and if it knocks us down, we're going to get back up and we're going to rebuild.
Overnight, voluntary evacuations were underway in Ascension Parish as floodwaters from the overflowing Amite River poured into the community. On Monday, National Guard helicopters pulled more people to safety from the unprecedented flooding hitting southeastern Louisiana. We went along as they took us on a search and rescue mission into the flood zone.
We're now flying over Denham Springs, Louisiana. As you can see, this area is covered in water right now.
Roughly 90% of the homes in Denham Springs have flood damage. The city's main highway is washed out. Christina Broad and her boyfriend Brooks Wilson returned to their flooded home for the first time Monday.
Oh my God, this is my entire life that I worked my entire life for, just washed away.
It's like the end of your life, end of your world, having to start over like that.
More than 11,000 people have been forced into shelters.
I never thought I'd see this day.
I know, man.
20,000 have been rescued since Friday, in large part due to the help of volunteers.
But I'm very proud of the effort that we're making. More than anything else, I'm proud of the way that Louisianans are taking care of their own.
Craig Pouchot's home is a loss, but he's thankful for what he still has.
We're homeless today, but we're hopeful. We're going to rebuild, we're going to get back.
All of this water is heading south into Ascension Parish, so there is still a flooding concern there. Governor John Bell Edwards will meet with federal officials to discuss the recovery process later this morning. Charlie?
Omar, thanks. To the deep south now, where thousands of volunteers are pouring into Louisiana to help flood victims
piece back their lives. At least 11 people have died. 30,000 people have been rescued since Friday, 40,000 homes damaged.
Parts of the region have started to dry out, but more flooding is threatening southern towns as water rushes downstream. Many people say they have never experienced anything this devastating before.
People here work hard for what they got, and to see them lose it because of this, it's hard. Saving people from Baton Rouge Sunday that moved here because they lived through Katrina, from Chalmette, thinking they was away from all of this, losing everything again. It's heartbreaking.
Omar Villafranca is in Sorrento, south of Baton Rouge. Omar, you look like you're standing in the middle of a lake. I know you're standing in the middle of a street. So what is the latest there?
The water here in Sorrento is slowly starting to recede. There's some railroad tracks that go through the town. So one side is draining, the other side is kind of going up. So we're trying to see what's going to happen here once the daylight comes out, because we do notice that the water is starting to slowly move. That's a good sign. The bad news is there's more rain in the forecast.
So what's the response, Omar, as today people are returning to what's left of their homes and their neighborhoods? And I guess that for a lot of Americans, I mean, generally when something like this happens, you get days and days of warnings, like in the case of Katrina. And here, this sort of all just crept up on people.
You're absolutely right. And you mentioned Katrina. That's a named storm. This wasn't. This was just supposed to be a rain event. And all of a sudden, it turns into a 48-hour rain event that drops about 30 inches of water. So people weren't really ready to evacuate because it wasn't a hurricane coming. It was just some rain. As far as the people coming back to their homes, there are some people who still cannot get to their homes because it's still too dangerous. The people that are going back, they're finding it, of course, ruined. Anything that the water touched, typically people just throw away. And just want to give you a heads up here. There's a term that people use down here. They call it the Cajun Navy. These are people who are volunteers with their own boats, airboats, fishing boats. We have literally seen a navy of these people parked on the side of the road, ready to go, ready to help their fellow neighbor navigate some of these roads, going looking for people. You might have heard that. That's an airboat you heard. I want to see if we can show it to you. Right over here. This guy's going to go not on a road. There we go. He's firing up over there. That is part of the Cajun Navy. Volunteers who are going to go try to look for people who may still be looking for some help and rescue them, bring them to drier land. Later on today, some officials are going to go on a search mission. They're literally going to go door to door to businesses, homes, and cars and look in. They're worried that the death toll is going to go up. It's similar to what we saw in Katrina. They're talking about spray painting homes, saying it's clear, or we found one dead in here. That's the big fear. Since a lot of people didn't see this as a hurricane, they didn't evacuate. We'll have to see later today if the death toll goes up.
It sounds like the Cajun Navy is going to be pretty busy because, as I understand it, Mother Nature is not cooperating and there's more rain in the forecast.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And even just a little quarter-inch of rain, which other parts of the country would gladly take to cool things down, a quarter-inch of rain here would be an absolute nightmare. Where I'm standing would probably go up several feet. Everything is so waterlogged. Not only the rivers and the canals, but some of the bayous here are also just filled up. Everything is draining slow, and more rain, more problems.
Omar Villafranca, thank you.
So there is a huge fire that has really gotten out of control incredibly fast. It's going on in California. This is San Bernardino County, east of LA. It's near Cajon Pass. By the way, thank you everybody who tweeted me and emailed me yesterday that I mispronounced that. Seriously, I really do appreciate it because I haven't been out in that area. But either way, this is a really bad fire. It's the Blue Cut Fire is what it's being called. Over 80,000 people have been evacuated. And get this, over 30,000 acres have burned in just 24 hours. And you look at the forecast over the next couple of days, I mean, the wind doesn't look that bad, and the wind hasn't even been that bad. Usually when you have a wildfire erupt so fast, it's because of the wind and the dryness, but in this case, it's just so ridiculously dry that basically the whole ground out there is tinder. Look at that video. I mean, if you live out in the east, this is something you've probably never seen before, myself included. Can you imagine what it must be like? You're just trying to take your family out to dinner or something, and it looks like the whole sky is on fire. 0% contained right now, but San Bernardino County says that they've got, close to 1,000 firefighters working on this. So I'd imagine they're going to start to get a handle on it pretty soon.
News right now on the Blue Cut fire. It's now at 6,500 acres. 700 firefighters are battling this blaze. So far, 2 firefighters suffered minor injuries. Evacuations are in order, and the I-15 is shut down at the Cajon Pass in both directions. Let's send it back to 13 Action News reporter Brian Callahan with the latest from our live drive. Brian.
Well, Trish, we're about 25 minutes from the closure heading southbound at Ranchero Road. I want to give you a quick look out front of the truck. You can see all of the smoke in front of it. It's really picked up since we were last live. If I pan left, you can actually see there in the middle of the screen, that's blue sky you can see there, but all of the smoke at gray just hanging above it there. Pan back the other side over these mountains here, you can see all of the smoke and that glow of orange there as we're getting closer and closer to the fire. As I said, we're about 25 minutes from the closure heading southbound 15. Northbound lanes of 15 are also closed at this point. So we are getting closer. We're going to keep you updated throughout the day as we get closer in here and get to talk to the firefighters on the ground trying to battle this fire. Reporting live in Live Drive, Brian Callahan, 13 Action News.
Well, he's dropping right on it. DC-10 coming in to drop its third load. This is the third drop we've seen here directly on this spot fire. Looks to be about 3 or 4 acres. They're very... Pretty big flame off to the right too, Robbie. We'll eye this down a little bit. Watch your iris. .138. It is so large and so widespread and so difficult to get the structure protection. There are so many homes that are threatened, and you can see these homes just absolutely. You can see a propane tank, or from the ground here, the resources are trying to hit the head of the fire, trying to get slowed down, but we haven't seen anything.
The Blue Cut incident started yesterday at 10:44 hours. It's currently 30,000 acres with 0% containment. Today it's going to be hot and dry just like yesterday. Minimum humidities will be below 10%, so it's very dry out there on the fire line. Temperatures will reach up to 100 plus on the fire itself. The fuels are extremely dry and very explosive this time of year. And in my 40 years of fighting fire, I've never seen fire behavior so extreme as it was yesterday. Rapid rates of spread. We've had spotting up to half a mile ahead of the fire.
This is a challenging year. One of the things that we're seeing is that the fires are burning in a really unprecedented fashion. It's to the point where explosive fire growth is the new normal this year. And that's a challenge for all of us to take on.
In a word, it was devastating. A lot of homes lost yesterday. There will be a lot of families that come home to nothing. If there's a bright side, a silver lining, there are some homes that were saved. Hard, brave work of men and women, firefighters, yesterday put themselves in harm's way to evacuate and to protect structures. And because of that, and in the diligent work of homeowners before the fire, some structures were saved.
Well, on the West Coast, the explosive Blue Cut wildfires threatening homes and lives in Southern California. This fast-moving fire has already forced around 82,000 people to evacuate areas east of Los Angeles. It torched more than 31,000 acres and is less than 5% contained. Jasmine Veal is on the phone with me from Wrightwood, California. Jasmine, have firefighters made any progress in trying to contain this fire?
They've made little progress, Rena, at this point. It's still 4% containment, and we do have temperatures really heating up right now under these very dry conditions. And where I'm at right now, about 2 miles from that small mountain resort town of Wrightwood, you see a lot of smoke now, not so much the flames that we were seeing just eating up the dry brush this morning. But we are now focused, at least the firefighters are telling me, on keeping this fire from jumping the highway closer to these homes and communities. but it is still burning, and they still have a long way to go.
Jasmine, you've been telling us over the past couple of days just how fast moving this fire is. Do you expect more evacuations in this area?
No word on whether they're going to increase the evacuation zone. They seem to be pretty confident. The winds are cooperating right now. They are pushing, it appears, the fire further to the east, which is a good thing because we don't want the fire moving west, which would bring it to the larger community of Brightwood. So they have not talked about expanding the evacuation zones. But as you mentioned, you have just thousands of people still under those mandatory evacuation orders, and they made it a pretty large area from day one.
It's incredible to watch. We're looking at the planes there throwing retardant over these fires. So much to contain. Any word on how weather might impact the spread of this fire?
Yeah, and unfortunately, we have those red flag conditions in place all the way through tomorrow. And I was talking to some retired firefighters, actually, who live in Wrightwood, and they have chosen to stay to defend their home. But as firefighters know all too well, they said the conditions today look exactly like they were yesterday, so that's making them very nervous in terms of the heat and possibly those gusty winds returning later this afternoon.
Okay, Jasmine Veal in California. Thank you, Jasmine.
It's already been a year of unprecedented extreme weather. Record floods have been blamed for at least 13 deaths and damage to about 40,000 homes in the U.S. state of Louisiana as authorities began assessing the devastation on Wednesday, August 17th. Rains that started last Thursday have dumped more than 2.5 feet of water on parts of Louisiana. The American Red Cross has called the flooding the worst disaster to hit the United States since Superstorm Sandy in 2012. Meanwhile, July was the hottest month ever recorded. Well, now joining us to discuss this from State College, Pennsylvania, is Dr. Michael E. Mann. Michael is the Distinguished Professor and Director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State University, author of the book, The Hockey Stick and the Climate Wars. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
So we've seen this historic flooding not only in Louisiana, but more recently in West Virginia, even right here close to Baltimore in Ellicott City. Are we seeing more and more of this, and is this connected to climate change?
Yeah, and in Texas and in Phoenix, Arizona, where they had this rain bomb, as it was termed, just this immense downpouring of rain over a short period of time. We often hear about events being characterized lately as 1,000-year events. And what that means is that just given the usual statistics of the weather, we wouldn't expect such an event to happen more than once in 1,000 years, meaning we probably wouldn't expect to see it during our lifetimes. And yet we are seeing a plethora of these 1,000-year events, whether it's the flooding events in South Carolina, in Arizona, in Texas, as I said, and of course this latest event in Louisiana and Alabama. We are seeing 1,000-year events far too often to be able to attribute them just to randomness. We are seeing the loading of the random weather dice by climate change.
And talk a little bit about the science behind this. Why is there so much more rain falling across the country than we've seen in hundreds of years?
Yeah, and it's sort of interesting because there's this seeming paradox. We're seeing worse drought over large parts of the southern United States. The drought in California is unprecedented and ongoing, and yet we're also seeing these record flooding events. We have long predicted, decades ago, the climate models that we were using, which were very primitive by today's standards, predicted that we would see an overall expansion of the sort of areas of drought into regions like the southern United States, but we would see more intense rainfall events. So the rainfall events are fewer and farther between, but when they do happen, they produce much larger amounts of precipitation. And the physics behind that is really simple. It's basic thermodynamics that tells us that the warmer the atmosphere is, the more moisture it can hold. And so it's like a sponge. When you have a warmer atmosphere and you squeeze that sponge, which is what's happening when air rises to give us rainfall, you're going to get more rainfall out of those events. And that's what we're seeing. So while we could, dwell on discussions of the precise role that climate change had with any one of these events, collectively what we are seeing play out day to day in our weather, on our television screens, is due to the loading of the weather dice by climate change.
Now, we've seen publications like the New York Times apologize publicly for not sending teams down to Louisiana until Sunday. This historic rain started Thursday, and so they've apologized for that. But is the corporate media, the mainstream media, are they doing a good enough job making the connection that you're making between these events and climate change?
Yeah, so the New York Times is a good example. They are actually an example of a media outlet that has done a very good job in sort of connecting those dots, explaining how climate change is influencing extreme weather. And they have, some of the best reporters on the beat there at the New York Times. On the other hand, there was a segment just last night on the NewsHour, the PBS NewsHour, which typically does a pretty good job in covering these issues. But there was a fairly disturbing lack of context that was provided in that segment when it comes to the way that climate change is influencing these events. They didn't really do a good job connecting the dots, and in fact, the segment was far more dismissive about the connection than the science objectively merits. And so some outlets, even like PBS, which we think of as doing a pretty good job when it comes to climate change, are failing in properly connecting the dots.
And finally, can we expect more of this extreme weather, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, unfortunately, many of my colleagues like to say, well, we have to deal with a new normal. It's even worse than that. There will be no new normal because everything continues to shift. We continue to see even more and more of these events as we continue down this highway of escalating carbon emissions and further warming of the planet and the resulting climate change. The only way to prevent that is to bring our emissions to a rapid descent. And the good news is that we're starting to see some progress. The Paris Summit last year, some of the other policy developments that have occurred since then, we're starting to turn the corner in transitioning away from a fossil fuel economy, but we're going to need to do it even faster if we're going to avoid ever more catastrophic climate change.
And, just to turn to the political spectrum just for a moment, if that's okay, Hillary Clinton's transition team has been criticized for its links to fossil fuel extraction and fracking. And certainly Donald Trump doesn't seem to be any different to that, in that respect at least. There are other differences there, of course. Do you have any thoughts you can share about the presidential election and climate change and the policy platforms of the two leading candidates?
Sure. I think it's night and day, frankly. And while we can always criticize some of the specifics of any candidate, I actually consider Hillary Clinton to be extremely strong on climate change. In fact, I've interacted with her and her team in the past. I know that they get the science. I know that they care about the problem. And we can quibble about some of the specifics of their policies, but it's night and day when it comes to the contrast between Hillary Clinton, who really will act on climate change, and Donald Trump, who joins many other in his party, unfortunately, dismissing that there's even a problem. So this next election may be a make or break election for dealing with climate change, and the contrast couldn't be greater. If you care about climate, if you are worried about climate change, then I think the choice is fairly clear in this next election.
And if there are specifics on issues like fracking and fossil fuel extraction for Hillary Clinton, what specifics would you like to see her sort of adopt? What policies? How would you like? Where would you like, if you could write her environmental policy platform? What would you like to see in there?
Well, there's always a bit of a compromise here because, you have to work with the business community, but you have to put your foot down when it comes to policies that just are not acceptable, like the expansion of the tar sands, the continued mining of the tar sands and the building of a pipeline. And Hillary Clinton is against that. And she's for putting a price on carbon. So my argument would be that Hillary Clinton's approach on this more or less comports with my own feelings about what's the best way to deal with this problem. In the case of natural gas and fracking, you could ban it outright, or you could put a price on carbon. If we put a price on carbon, then the damage that natural gas, oil, and other fossil fuels are doing to the planet will be taken into account in terms of a signal in the marketplace, and that will push us in the direction of that transition away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. So I actually think that the sorts of market mechanisms that Hillary Clinton supports can solve this problem. I'm not sure we need an outright ban. Some would argue that it's better to work within the sort of the market itself to solve these problems, and I think she's got good policies for doing that.
All right, Michael, we'll invite you on again because, some would argue that the market has proven that it is willing to take us down this path of disaster, of climate change. And, there are more radical steps that need to be taken. But, we'll invite you.
That's why we need a price on carbon to make sure that the market can't get away with doing that. Absolutely.
All right, well, we'll certainly look forward to continuing this discussion. Thanks so much for joining us.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us at the Real News Network.
Two major disasters in two different parts of the country have sent tens of thousands of people fleeing from their homes and caused millions of dollars in damage. Are these just freak events, or are they in some way related to climate change? William Brangham brings us the latest.
It's called the Blue Cut Fire, and it's wreaking havoc in Southern California. The massive blaze closed major roadways, like part of Interstate 15 that connects Los Angeles and Las Vegas. And last night, officials issued evacuation orders for more than 34,000 homes. That's some 82,000 people.
I think this is the worst that I've ever seen, and it's kind of getting used to the idea of being homeless.
The fire erupted yesterday in the Cajon Pass, a critical corridor just north of San Bernardino, only 60 miles from Los Angeles. It quickly expanded to more than 45 square miles. 10 air tankers, 15 helicopters, and some 1,300 firefighters were deployed within 24 hours. They faced hot and windy conditions.
The fuels are extremely dry and very explosive this time of year. And in my 40 years of fighting fire, I've never seen fire behavior so extreme as it was yesterday.
I was able to get up this morning and get some eyes on it from the air. In a word, it was devastating. A lot of homes lost yesterday. There'll be a lot of families that come home to nothing.
Governor Jerry Brown declared a state of emergency for the Blue Cut area, as he did earlier this week for a major blaze north of San Francisco. That fire has since started to fade. The man suspected of sparking it, as well as 16 smaller fires over the last year, has now been charged with arson. 1,700 miles across the country, a different kind of disaster is unfolding in Louisiana, where some of the worst floods in history have hit the state. As the water begins to recede in some parts, the numbers are stark. At least 11 people have died, 30,000 people have been rescued, and 40,000 homes damaged.
We lost everything, God, just about. But we got out safely, and all our friends are safe, so that's the main thing.
So far, about 68,000 people have signed up for assistance from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The American Red Cross says this flooding has triggered its largest disaster operation since Superstorm Sandy in 2012. The catastrophes in California and Louisiana have again raised the question, are these events caused in part by global climate change? Both events follow a July that was the planet's single hottest month since records began in the 19th century. And many computer models have indicated that as temperatures rise, droughts and extreme weather are likely to follow. To help us sort out what's driving these extreme events, we turn to two scientists well versed in these matters. Barry Keim is a climatologist for the state of Louisiana and a professor at Louisiana State University, and Adam Sobel is a professor of environmental science at Columbia University. He also directs its initiative on extreme weather and climate. Thank you both for being here. Barry, I'd like to start with you. Before we get into the science of all of this, can you just tell us how are things in Baton Rouge right now?
Well, in Baton Rouge, they're improving, but across the broader area, there's still some issues. Things are slowly starting to settle down or simmer down a little bit, but right now, across most of my immediate region, people have already started ripping out carpets and gutting houses. So we're already starting the cleanup.
So this was obviously a historic amount of rainfall that fell on your state and that flooded you all out. Can you give us a sense of the context of how serious these storms were, and should we be thinking about these in terms of climate change?
This event was a tropical disturbance. It was a very weak, in fact, I would classify it practically as an easterly wave. And the amount of rainfall amounts, as I suggested, were staggering. Just to put this in perspective, a 100-year rain event in this region is roughly 14 inches. A 1,000-year event is about 21 inches. Well, we have about 7 or 8 sites across southeast Louisiana or south central Louisiana that exceed the 1,000-year mark. And in fact, we have one site that had over 31 inches of rain. Now, a 1,000-year event is 21 inches, and this was 31 inches. So that ought to give you some context on just how severe this rainstorm was across this area.
In that context, do you think of this as something that is what we would expect to see with climate change, or is that not part of your thinking?
Well, no single event really tells you anything about climate change specifically. And even 1 year's worth of events. And admittedly, this past year has been very strange. I mean, we had the floods in South Carolina. Texas had some serious floods. We even had a major flood earlier this year in Louisiana. In fact, we even had an early one back in this past October, which was quite extraordinary. So it does seem like there's something unusual going on, but I still wouldn't quite characterize this as being a sign that the climate has officially changed. We're just in a very unusual period right now, and this could be indicative of climate change, but it's way, way too early, and we need a lot more data and understanding of the science to be able to say something conclusively like that.
Adam Sobel, I would put this same question to you. In California, we've seen this historic drought. It's dried out the landscape. It's partly why we've seen these explosive fires across the state there. But again, droughts are not unusual for California, the same way floods are not unusual for Louisiana. How do you see these in relation to climate change?
Well, I think you have to talk about each event separately. So let's start with the Louisiana event. I think the California situation is a little bit different and has been going on for a number of years. So there have actually been a few studies specifically on that event. But since we're talking about Louisiana and the floods now, just for some general context, I mean, across the United States, as well as most places in the world where there's adequate data to ask the question, we see increases over the last decades, or in some cases the last century, in the extremity of severe rain events. So we see heavy rain events becoming heavier and a larger fraction of the rain falling in heavy events. And this is what our climate projections tell us should happen as the climate warms, although to uncertain degrees, but it's qualitatively consistent, and we expect it on physical grounds as a warming climate means that there's more water vapor in the atmosphere. Now, it's true that each individual event is a result of many factors, and climate change is at most one of them, and usually a small one. So a lot of things have to happen for an extreme event to occur, otherwise it wouldn't be an extreme event. And so climate change can at most push the odds a little bit in one direction. So, I mean, we now have a new emerging area of science called extreme event attribution, where people actually do studies and have ways of making probabilistic statements. You can't ever say this event was caused by climate change or this single event is conclusive evidence of climate change, but you can say that climate change appears to have made it such % more probable, or given that it occurred, make it such and such % more extreme. Those studies haven't yet been done on the Louisiana event. My guess is that they will be done pretty soon. They can get done pretty quickly now. And I would cautiously predict that they're going to show some increase in the likelihood of this happening due to climate change, although I wouldn't want to put a number on it. So that's sort of the broad context. I think it's the kind of thing we expect to see more as the future proceeds, and it's the kind of thing we have been seeing. But I agree that to make stronger statements than that about a specific event, it's certainly possible to overstate the connection, but there's a lot of science behind the statement that there may be some connection there.
Barry, back to you. I'm just curious, do you think that this is what we've just got to become accustomed to, that what was once considered an extreme event is now just the new normal? And if so, what does that mean for policymakers?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly in a period right now where we've seen quite a few extremes, but we've had some periods in the past where we've had clustering of really big, catastrophic rainfall events in the past as well. But I tell you, the last decade or so really does raise some eyebrows and very, very suspicious. And as to what this means for policy implications, I mean, this is just so complex, so politically loaded that I mean, it's really tough to navigate through these waters, so to speak. And so, yeah, it's really hard to say a whole lot conclusively on what kind of policy should proceed as a result of these recent extremes.
Adam, with relation to the fire in California, and the many people have pointed to the very long drought that has dried out much of California and makes these fires more common and more violent when they actually occur. How do you see climate change in relation to that particular event?
Right. So if we look at the drought in California, there have actually been several studies of it, some of it done by my colleagues here at Columbia, and those studies actually show the complexity of studying events like this, because the answer actually depends how you ask the question. If you ask about just the lack of rainfall, of course the cause of a drought is just lack of rainfall, then the studies have tended to come to the conclusion that it's not, this event is not fundamentally caused by climate change. That said, once you have a lack of rainfall, the hotter temperatures that we see as a result of human influence on climate cause water to evaporate from the soils more quickly, and so you have overall a drier land surface and lower reservoirs and all of that. And there is a climate change influence. So if you ask about the lack of rainfall, this event appears to be largely natural, is what the studies have shown. But if you ask about the overall dryness of California, there does seem to be some influence of higher temperature, which is a result of climate change. So the studies have come to different conclusions, in part because they ask different questions. But I think that's the complicated answer to that question, as far as we know now.
All right, Adam Sobel, Barry Keim, thank you both very much for being here.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.